Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kaka, ka tangi hoki a hao, te he Māori ora. E na mana, e na reo o ra rakatira mā tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā kātou te maru o tēnā kātou te raro o te maru o ka mana whenua, ka te māmoe waitaha kaitahu no mai haramai welcome. I stand here under the umbrella of the people of this place, ka te māmoe waitaha kaitahu, and welcome you here. Ki te whare, tūnei, tēnā koe, tūtonu. To the house that stands here, welcome, and may you stand forever. But in case there is some risk of that not happening, please note the exits, and in the case of an earthquake, drop, cover and hold, but assembly points are outside the building, follow the staff. E na mate haere hoki atura ki te po. May we remember those that have passed within our wider whānau. Ko waiao, ko Richard Blakey tāku ingoa, hei kai mahi aha o tāku whaka ihu waka, no mai hara mai welcome. Good evening everyone, welcome to this inaugural professorial lecture where we celebrate the promotion of Professor Rachael McLean to that title. My name is Richard Blakey, I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Enterprise, and I'm here to welcome you tonight and give you a little bit of information about what lies ahead, and then some of our other esteemed guests, our other esteemed members of the academic party will play other roles. Lindley Anderson, Acting Dean of DSM, will introduce Rachael, and then after the event, Professor Sir Jim Mann will say some vote of thanks, and then our PVC, Professor Megan Gibbons, will have a very special role to invite us all back to the staff club should the event have gone well. These are wonderful celebrations of the life of the academic life in the university. We apply very rigorous and high standards to appointment and promotion to the professorial positions at the University of Otago, requiring levels of service, performance and leadership at the highest standards over a sustained period. And we then celebrate when someone achieves that through inviting them to talk about the things that have led to their achievement over their careers. And we have seen in Rachael McLean, as Lindley will say in more detail, a remarkable career to date. It's very unusual. I don't think it's ever been the case before at one of these where I've looked at the professor's CV and said that exemplifies interdisciplinarity to the most extreme degree by having 3 degrees from Otago, awarded by 3 of our different academic divisions, and having a teaching and research career that includes teaching into the 4th of our academic divisions as well. So the ability to train through a number of disciplines to transfer that knowledge into your principal focus in public health and nutrition exemplifies what we expect out of the best and brightest of our academics. You've contributed to key global issues in health affecting lives, as well as that you bring more than a decade of experience as a practitioner into teaching and research, so also exemplifying the deep and meaningful connection between research, teaching and practice in our academic divisions. So on behalf of the university, Rachael, I would like to offer our sincere congratulations on achieving this promotion, and we'll ask the audience to join me in congratulating you, as I also invite Professor Lindley Anderson to give you a more formal introduction to the lecture. So congratulations.
Thank you, Richard. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai, ko Lindley Anderson tōku ingoa. Welcome to everyone who is present here and to those also attending online. My name is Lindley Anderson and I am the Acting Dean of the Dunedin School of Medicine. It is my role and great pleasure to introduce you to Professor Rachael McLean and to tell you a little bit about her. But before we do that, I'd just like to welcome and acknowledge some pretty significant people in Rachael's life. First of all, those who are in the room today, her father, Dr. Malcolm McLean, her husband, Jonathan Otley, her son, Luke Otley, and her daughter, Sylvia Otley, and her partner, Saoirse Ben. We'd also like to acknowledge her family attending online, and they include her son, Nathaniel Otley, and his wife, Ilara McIndoe, and they're attending from New York, and also her sister-in-law, Dr. Denise Atkins from Auckland. So welcome to you all. Now on to telling you a little bit about Rachael. So some of you may not know, but Rachael actually grew up in Dunedin, and she came to academia via a clinical route. She was first a GP before becoming an academic, and now Professor McLean is a public health physician with an expertise in nutrition. One of the focuses of her research is the relationship between food, nutrition, and chronic disease, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, obesity, and diabetes. Her research therefore examines the environmental influences that determine how and what people eat, with a focus on improving health and improving equity. Much of Rachael's research focuses on public health approaches to reducing salt intake. Her work contributes to international best practice and scientific debate and has informed dietary recommendations both nationally and internationally. Her research connections with national and international scholars explores the ways to implement effective policy in this area. Rachael enjoys working with collaborators across Aotearoa and supervising her research students. She has also undertaken research for and advised the New Zealand Government Ministry of Health, Stroke Foundation and Heart Foundation, and hopes to change policy and food environments to make healthy eating easier for individuals, whānau and communities. Now, on a more personal level, Rachael loves music. She plays the piano, and she's an avid reader, and she also likes to grow flowers, so she'll surely appreciate what's on the left beside me. So it is my very great pleasure to welcome Professor Rachael McLean to the stage, and please join with me in welcoming her. Thank you. Sorry, I'm bound to need some water. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko kōtiranga me ingarangi te whenua o Oku Tipuna, ko Otipoti te kāinga, ko McLean toku whānau, ko Rachael toku ingoa, tēnā tātou katoa. It is an enormous privilege to be here tonight, and I'm very grateful to see friends and colleagues here as well as my family. As is customary on these occasions, I'm going to be talking a bit about my journey to becoming a professor and then on to my research before making some important acknowledgements. Can I just get this on the full screen? Sorry. Okay, I think I'm ready to go. Okay, when thinking about how to approach this lecture, I was immediately reminded of a song from one of my favourite albums, Remain in Light by Talking Heads. And I asked myself, well, how did I get here? My journey to becoming a professor hasn't been a typical or obvious one. I certainly didn't have a plan when I left school that led directly to where I am now. I did things that interested me and tried things out over the years.
However, I do think that what I have learned has influenced and contributed to my current role in public health. So I'm going to talk a bit about that in the first part of this lecture. As a family, we've had a long association with the University of Otago over 5 generations. Both my parents are graduates of the University of Otago, and I remember attending both their graduation ceremonies in the Dunedin Town Hall when I was a child. My mother Vivian, seen here, was a pianist and a musician and has a Bachelor of Music with honours from Otago. She worked a lot over the years playing music with both staff and students of the music department in Marama Hall and elsewhere. My father Malcolm completed a PhD in religious studies while he was a senior lecturer in the Department of Phenomenology of Religion, and this is his PhD gown that I'm wearing today. On my mother's side, both her parents are graduates of Otago. Lawrence was a graduate in law and Francis in classical studies. Francis's father was Ernest Merrington. He was master at Knox Theological College, which is now part of the university, and he was the minister at First Presbyterian Church in Moray Place. On Laurie's side, his father was Charles North, who was a lecturer in obstetrics and gynecology at the medical school. My husband Jonathan has a diploma in teaching from the Dunedin College of Education, which was not part of the university at the time, but is now. We have 3 children, Nathaniel, Luke and Sylvia. Nathaniel has a Bachelor of Music with honours, majoring in music composition and violin performance, and his wife Alara has degrees from Otago in law and music. And Luke has a Bachelor of Arts majoring in media studies and psychology. I was born in 1967 with decimal currency and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I was the eldest child of my parents, Malcolm and Vivian, and here we are in the mountains of northern India where we were living at the time. We moved to Dunedin when I was about 7, and I attended North East Valley Primary School, Dunedin North Intermediate and Logan Park High School. I enjoyed school and enjoyed the wide range of opportunities I had, including in science, humanities, music and drama. I particularly remember this campaign, which was running when I was at high school, Girls Can Do Anything. I found it very powerful, and I believed it was true. I left school at the end of 1984 and got my first job at the University of Otago, working in the computing centre as a summer student. My job was entering data into the computer from paper survey forms, my first taste of university research. I enrolled initially in a BSc, but changed quickly to a BA, majoring in history with a minor in philosophy. I was lucky to be taught by many people who will be familiar faces to those in the room, and I learned a lot that underpins my public health practice today. I studied New Zealand history with Tom Brooking, Eric Olson and Barbara Brooks. I learned about the impacts of colonisation, politics and the origins of the welfare state. I learned about Te Tiriti or Waitangi and remember when Claudia Orange's important book was published in 1987. I distinctly remember a tutorial with Barbara Brooks in which we discussed Waitangi Day and Te Tiriti, which profoundly changed my thinking. I also learnt about the processes and impacts of colonisation in other places, in India with Hugh MacLeod, pictured here, and across Africa with John Omar Cooper. At the end of my BA, I decided that what I really wanted to do was to work with people, and I was accepted into Otago Medical School. This was a very different experience. The institution was hierarchical and conservative, and I learned that maybe girls couldn't do anything after all, or at least not as easily. This was a huge culture shock, and I was grateful to have a number of good friends in my class as allies, Sharika Stang, Al Cameron, Rachel Thompson, Glenda Barber and Sue Billington in particular. I'm pleased to say that things have changed very much at the medical school since that time. This was also the time when the findings of the National Cervical Cancer Inquiry, led by Dame Sylvia Cartwright, were causing shockwaves across the medical profession. The establishment of the Office of the Health and Disability Commissioner, the Code of Health and Disability Consumer Rights, new guidelines for ethical practice and research, and the establishment of independent ethics committees profoundly changed the medical practice and research in Aotearoa. I graduated with my medical degree in 1993, and Jonathan and I moved to Gisborne, where I spent 2 years as a house surgeon at Gisborne Hospital. I went there to experience practice in a small hospital, and for sun and surf, a different life experience. So there's Gisborne here in the Tairāwhiti region. I was not prepared for the profound inequities in health I encountered, largely and disproportionately experienced by Māori. These included rheumatic heart disease, chronic renal failure, severe heart failure and cellulitis, and workplace and other injury. I saw firsthand the inequities in access to the determinants of health and in healthcare, and what I now know is institutional racism. I also learnt the importance of a diverse workforce that reflects the community we live in. I was lucky to work with many skilled and competent Māori nurses and other health professionals who understood culture and contexts and the importance of whānau for health and well-being, and they shared some of that knowledge with me. At this point, I decided on a career in general practice and started this with a series of locums based in Te Puia Hospital, up here, travelling to clinics across the Tairāwhiti region from Te Araroa down to Tokomaru Bay. After a short period of international travel, Jonathan and I returned to Dunedin, where I did my formal GP training and we started our family. The thing about clinical medicine is that you're privileged to learn a lot about the lives of a wide variety of people. I learned many lessons that have informed my approach to public health. I learned that people don't want to be unhealthy, even those that appear to make obviously unhealthy choices. There are a range of different factors that influence health, including competing priorities, environmental influences, poverty or wealth, racism, and access to healthcare. These are not distributed evenly, and so blaming individuals for their health status is usually profoundly unfair. I worked in a variety of GP practices across Dunedin and saw many different models of primary healthcare provision, but public health beckoned as an opportunity to work further upstream in the prevention space. I completed my public health medicine training and see myself very much as a public health physician and have an active role in the New Zealand College of Public Health Medicine. During my public health medicine training, I was lucky to have a placement in the Edgar Diabetes and Obesity Research Centre with Jim Mann and discovered my passion for food and nutrition research, which is largely what I do today. So why food? My interest in food wasn't new. My father, Malcolm, has always shared his interest in and passion for good food, as you can see in this ODT clip from 1979. I remember going to stay with Dad in the school holidays and planning our meals and recipes from around the world, especially from India. Dad also took us to interesting restaurants, and we learned about the links between food and culture. Dad is an excellent cook and manages this in a wide variety of settings, including on some of the many tramping trips he took us on as children. And of course, food is much more than nourishment. It is a central part of family and community life. We celebrate important occasions by sharing food. These are photos from our whānau, but this is true of many families as well as wider whānau and community groups. Food connects us to our environment through gathering food or growing it in family and community garden settings. We cannot have food without healthy, sustainable food systems and a healthy environment. Increasingly, we are learning about the value of ancient and Indigenous knowledge to inform sustainable food systems into the future. There is also something deeply personal about food, about providing food for loved ones. The giving and acceptance of food is fundamental to relationships and the human experience. I'm fond of this quote from a Cochrane review, which just happens to be about tube feeding patients with severe dementia. We all know this. Food not only sustains us, but provides pleasure, social and cultural opportunities, and can also be an act of love, whether you are preparing food for someone you care for or eating food that has been prepared for you. Which brings me to the science. As I mentioned, during my public health training, I got a position at the Edgar Diabetes and Obesity Research Centre with Jim and others as project manager for the National Evaluation of the Healthy Eating, Healthy Action, or HEHA strategy. This was a national public health strategy to improve health and reduce obesity and type 2 diabetes, and it was set up by the then Labour coalition government from around 2003. If you look at the structure diagram, which I've included here on the right, you can see that it was underpinned by fundamental public health goals and principles. The Treaty of Waitangi, reducing inequalities. It was ambitious in its vision and used the approaches for action of the World Health Organization Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion, identifying key priority groups and a focus on intersectoral and community-based action. The national evaluation that we were working on was designed to inform best practice over the life of the program. However, there was a general election in 2008, and HEHA was completely cut in the first 100 days of the new national-led coalition government. Programs across the country were cut, as was our evaluation. There was damage to communities, community trust, and community engagement. So why was HEHA cut? Well, politics intervened. In the lead up to the election, there was a lot of rhetoric about the program. Phrases such as nanny state, food police were being used to undermine the program with a push to emphasise personal or individual responsibility for food choice rather than creating supportive environments. Unfortunately, what we know is that initiatives that prioritise personal responsibility usually disproportionately benefit people who are already privileged, and they're not focused on equity. Our evaluation only managed to publish some preliminary findings before being completely shut down. Having finished my public health medicine training, I was keen to pursue a career in public health research and was awarded a Health Research Council Clinical Research Training Fellowship to undertake PhD study. I sat down with Jim and we talked about potential areas of research. I wanted to do something food related that could have direct application to influence policy. We talked with some people at the New Zealand Food Safety Authority, or NZFSA, which doesn't exist anymore, who had an interest in dietary sodium or salt. And I'm going to use those terms interchangeably for a while, because the vast majority of sodium that we consume comes from salt or sodium chloride. NZFSA indicated that it would be useful to have someone conduct an evidence review and to work on how to interpret the sodium results of the New Zealand Adult Nutrition Survey, shown down here, which was in the field at the time. I started my PhD in the Department of Medicine, supervised by Jim Mann, Janet Hook and Sheila Williams. My first task was to prepare an evidence summary, which is here. In this, I outlined the strong evidence that links high salt intake with adverse health outcomes, particularly raised blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. Population-level salt reduction strategies have been shown to be both effective and cost-effective for reducing cardiovascular disease, and that is why these are a priority for WHO to reduce non-communicable disease worldwide. In my review, I outlined the rationale for an intervention to lower population salt intake in New Zealand. An effective, equitable intervention would need to focus on environmental change through food reformulation, rather than expecting people to change their habits individually. But because at the time, from a policy perspective, we had moved to a focus on individual responsibility, I was interested in investigating tools to enable people to make informed food purchasing decisions, and so conducted investigations into nutrition labelling. I interviewed people about their thoughts and experiences, and then conducted an online experiment testing different nutrition labelling formats on fictional brands of baked beans. You can see those here. What we found was that the nutrition information panel, usually on the back of the product, on the back of the can, was difficult to interpret compared to the front of pack labels, such as the traffic light label, which you see down here, and the percent daily intake label, which is over here. The health star rating wasn't a thing at the time. This predates the health star rating. The traffic light label was the easiest for people to understand. They could easily understand that red was bad and green was go. But the nutrition-related claims, such as reduced salt here and low salt up here, were particularly powerful, even if they were not obviously backed up by the nutrition information on display, such as here in the middle can. Our findings reinforced that if we're going to emphasise personal responsibility, then we need regulation to ensure that people are adequately informed. Or, as is outlined in this graphic, from a Canadian campaign to improve food labelling, if I'm about to eat 3 days' worth of sodium, I think I have a right to know. The other main study related to interpreting the results of the Adult Nutrition Survey. The survey used 3 methods to assess intake of dietary salt or sodium. A 24-hour diet recall, where participants were asked to list everything they consumed the previous day. Questions about dietary habits, and a single spot urine collection was made. So that's what that looks like here, just a small amount. This single or spot urine was a convenient alternative to the gold standard method of measuring sodium intake, using a 24-hour urine excretion of sodium as a measure of intake. In a 24-hour urine, people collect all the urine they pass over a 24-hour period, which is more accurate but less convenient than a single or spot urine collection. My work involved comparing the accuracy of the different methods of measurement. I conducted a validation study comparing the results from a spot versus a 24-hour urine in order to inform interpretation of the spot urine results of the survey. This is important because the measurement of people's usual salt intake matters. In most societies, salt intake varies quite a lot from day to day, depending on what we eat and how much we eat. And so what we want to know is someone's usual intake or their average intake. Measuring the average usual salt intake across a population matters, so we can assess whether we need public health interventions to reduce intake and to monitor progress of interventions against specific targets, so we can assure that we can have an evidence-based strategy. It's also important to measure usual salt intake at an individual level in epidemiological studies that assess the relationship between intake and health-related outcomes. So how should we do this? In populations, we use a large representative sample and measure intake on a single day for each person. The large sample can overcome individual day-to-day variability and some unreliability in the measure. As long as the measure is valid, we can produce a valid mean level. And we can see that here on the top right corner of this image. As all the individual values in black centre around the truth, or the bullseye, we will come up with an average that is close to the truth, even though each individual measure doesn't sit there. However, in epidemiological studies, we must have an accurate measure at the individual level, or our results will be misleading. So we need individual results to be much more reliable. We need an accurate measure for each individual, as seen on the bottom right. Which reminds me again of my favourite Talking Heads album. If we don't measure things properly in science, our results will be misleading. I've spent many years working on the question of how we can measure usual salt intake and spot urine and other methods for populations and individuals. And this is the area where my research has probably had the greatest international impact. The most common way to interpret spot urine results is to convert these results into an estimate of 24-hour urinary excretion using a specific formula. Formulae are derived from prediction equations from regression analyses. One that is most commonly used is the Kawasaki formula, here initially published in 1993, derived from a study in Japanese population, and this has evolved to this formula, which is the one that we use today. You don't need to follow the details, but what I would like you to notice is that these formula include measures of age, of weight, of height, and also of sex. When you compare the estimates from spot urine with the more accurate reference 24-hour urine over the same period, you can see whether using a spot urine is a suitable alternative measure. I'm going to show you a couple of results from our most recent analysis, but others, including my PhD work, show similar things. So this graph on the left plots the reference measured intake from 24-hour urine on the x-axis and the estimated 24-hour excretion from using the Kawasaki formula on the y-axis here. Each dot represents an individual participant's results. If the estimate is accurate, then all the dots will sit along or near to this red line of no difference. You can see quite clearly that that is not the case. The second graph looks at this in a different way, looking at agreement. Again, we have the measured intake on the x-axis from the 24-hour urine, but this time on the y-axis we have the difference between the two measures. Again, if the estimate is accurate, then most of the dots will sit on the red line or very close to the red line. And again, you see that that's not the case. You may also notice that the estimates are higher than the measured at low levels of intake, and the opposite is true at high levels of intake. And you'd expect that from a formula derived this way. So why does that matter? As I said, in epidemiological studies such as cohort studies or intervention trials, we assess the relationship between usual salt intake and health outcomes in each individual, so that we can make generalisations about what happens over groups of people in populations. What we see from well-conducted studies is there is a relationship between higher salt intake and high blood pressure, and we know from a huge number of trials that high blood pressure is associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, particularly heart disease and stroke. There's also some evidence of a direct relationship. If we use an estimate from spot urine rather than direct measurement from 24-hour urine to measure usual salt intake, we use a formula that includes BMI, age and sex. However, we know that these are also directly related to blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. So things get a bit messy. So does it matter? Well, yes, it does. These graphs show some results from the long-term follow-up of the Trials of Hypertension Prevention Study, a randomised controlled trial where the intervention group consumed a low-salt diet and the control group continued with their normal diet. Participants collected several 24-hour urines at baseline, and the investigators followed them up over 20 years, noting any subsequent health outcomes. The graphs show the relationship between usual salt intake on the x-axis and all-cause mortality or death on the y-axis. The graph on the left analyses the urine as a 24-hour urine, and the graph on the right analyses the urine with the Kawasaki formula. So on the left we see a relatively linear association between salt intake and mortality, indicating that the higher the salt intake is, the greater the risk of dying. However, when the researchers analysed the same urine results with the Kawasaki formula, this relationship turned into a J-shaped curve, suggesting that low salt intake was harmful compared to sort of middling salt intake. So low salt intake looks like it's associated with increased mortality. The authors of this study, who are colleagues of mine, and others have shown that this difference is a direct result of using the formula and is an example of measurement error. Despite this, a number of large studies using spot urine have been published, suggesting that lower intakes of salt can be harmful. This has resulted in some controversy in the scientific literature about the need for public health interventions, and I've just shown a couple of titles here, just a few examples. In the scientific community, controversy and debate can be interesting. However, it can have serious consequences. Here's an example of this getting into the popular press and undermining public health messages. So I particularly am fond of this. Now salt is safe to eat. Health fascists like me proved wrong after lecturing us all for years. So this undermines public health messages to individuals and communities. But these studies can also result in delays in government action, particularly with implementing public health interventions. And I know that that's what happened in New Zealand when some of these studies came out. Which brings me to the purpose of my research. Much of this work seems a bit esoteric. In fact, one of my co-authors and collaborators said to me one day that they just didn't find it interesting. I started doing this work because NZFSA wanted help in interpreting the spot urine results from the Adult Nutrition Survey. Our ongoing work in this area has directly informed public health interventions, dietary guidelines and nutrient reference values worldwide, and helped to deliver consistent evidence-based messages to the public and to policymakers. With colleagues, I've conducted a range of systematic reviews that have shown on average, up here in the top right, that 24-hour urine contains about 93% of sodium ingested over the same 24-hour period. That in a pooled analysis of over 10,000 participants from 34 countries, spot urine is an unreliable and invalid measure of usual salt intake in individuals. And in some of these others, shown that commonly used dietary assessment methods such as 24-hour diet recall tend to underestimate salt intake. And I've shown Claire Cameron's lovely forest plot here that shows that the difference is about 600 milligrams. I've also been involved in writing and publishing a range of letters to the editor and reviews in both the scientific and lay literature, explaining the science and fighting disinformation in this area. I've just shown a couple of examples here. With other colleagues, I've been involved in advocacy on different topics, such as these examples with Jim and other colleagues. Here we responded to a number of articles in academic journals and in the popular press, which were extolling the virtues of very low carbohydrate diets for health. We believed that this was contrary to the totality of the evidence in nutrition science and outlined our rationale in commentaries and letters. One of the highlights of my role has been working with and supporting research students in a diverse range of research that relates to food and nutrition, and I'm going to mention just a few examples. Celia Prentice, shown here, was a Masters of Dietetics student who examined the impact of fast foods on total salt intake. This involved her purchasing takeaway foods from independent operators in Wellington and in Dunedin, homogenising them in a blender and analysing them in the laboratory, including combusting samples in the bomb calorimeter. She showed that takeaway foods make a substantial contribution to salt intake, particularly for regular consumers of these foods. I was lucky to co-supervise some of Brian Mackenzie's PhD work when she was based at the George Institute for Global Health in Sydney. She conducted some really interesting research in Fiji, which explored how strong gendered beliefs around food and food provision were being challenged in contemporary Fiji by changing societal norms about food and work and environmental challenges associated with climate change. Nisa Widjastuti joined us from Indonesia and was co-supervised by Helen Harkham and Robin Turner. Nisa conducted an in-depth analysis of body size changes over time in Indonesia using the Indonesian Family Life Survey. She produced an elegant trajectory analysis of changes among adults, showing an overall trend of increasing body size over time between 1993 and 2014. Particularly in this small high-risk group, which she's called Group 3 in this graph. This will have profound implications for health in Indonesia, with increasing prevalence of obesity and obesity-related non-communicable disease. So when we celebrated Nisa's PhD success, Robin Turner made a cake. And when Nisa defended her PhD in her PhD oral, she was able to highlight this important finding with a T-shirt. Nansing Wang came from Singapore and recently completed her PhD under challenging conditions during COVID lockdowns. With funding from the Ministry for Primary Industries, Nansing used a novel method to measure the proportion of total salt intake that comes from discretionary sources. That's the salt that you add in cooking and at the table. To do this, she fused table salt with lithium in a very high temperature muffle furnace. She went through a few muffle furnaces actually, and then measured the lithium in the urine of study participants. This work was important for informing public health interventions to reduce salt intake while maintaining iodine intake, since iodised salt is an important source of iodine. And Claire Cameron here and Sheila Skeef and I celebrated her success as pictured here. Public health research is most definitely a team sport. You can't do it alone, and it's inherently interdisciplinary in nature. So there are many, many people I would like to thank, people who I have worked with and people who have supported me over the years. I'm not going to attempt to name them all. Thank you to everyone who has been a co-supervisor, a supervisor, a collaborator, a co-author, or a research student. I would like to particularly thank colleagues in preventive and social medicine, where I currently sit, in the Centre for Biostatistics, at the Edgar Diabetes and Obesity Research Centre, in human nutrition, and others across the university. There are, however, a few people I would like to particularly thank, people who have been important mentors, friends, supporters, and collaborators. Jim Mann has been a very important mentor and collaborator and a good friend over many years. Helen Isles works at the University of Auckland, also works in the salt space, and I've done a lot of work with Helen that I haven't even mentioned tonight. Norm Campbell from the University of Calgary in Canada has been a very important collaborator in the advocacy space. Louise Signal, a good mentor and a very good friend over the years. She's based at the University of Otago, Wellington. Jackie Webster from the George Institute for Global Health in Sydney. Sheila Skeef from the Department of Human Nutrition, expert in iodine, and iodine and salt go together very nicely, and she's also been a very good friend. Claire Cameron, a biostatistician, has been an important collaborator, and Richie and Sandia, who have been steadfast and lovely friends over many, many years. So thank you very much. I'm very, very grateful for all the love and support I've had from my family. Here's a photo of my immediate family. For Denise, this is blood. And you can see here my parents, Malcolm and Vivian, husband Jonathan, and my 3 children, Luke, Nathaniel, and Sylvia. My children are without doubt my greatest achievement, and I'm extremely proud of them. There are 2 very important family members that are not in this photo. Nathaniel's wife, Alara McIndoe, who took this photo, and Sylvia's partner, Saoirse Ben. The location is also significant. The photo was taken by Alara immediately after Nathaniel's honours recital in Marama Hall, which has been the location for so much of our family's musical life. Unfortunately, my mother, Vivian, isn't well enough to be here this evening. Thank you so much for coming, and I'm going to leave the last word to one of my all-time favourites, Joni Mitchell. Hopefully.
Kia ora, Rachel. Kia ora koutou. Ko te mantoka e hoa. I have the great privilege, Rachel, of being asked to thank you tonight. And I do so as a colleague and friend of long standing. I think Sheila and I were sort of coaches, were we, Sheila, in our outfits that we had on. So as a coach as well, perhaps. Yes. But very importantly, I've been asked to do so on behalf of Robin Turner, HOD of the Department of Preventive and Social Medicine, as most people here will know. Robin is very sorry not to be here tonight because she's not well, but she has asked me to not only express her regret, but I quote, send massive congratulations on behalf of herself and the whole department. I was very delighted when you decided that you wanted to do a PhD, because I thought that you were ideally qualified to become an academic. And I think Rachel has given quite a good indication of why she was so well qualified. That tremendous background that she had in primary care and general practice and in public health. I was particularly impressed by the fact that she had done a BA in history, and especially that she'd converted from a BSc, because I'd always wanted to do more study in humanities, but I was never brave enough to do it before I started medicine. And Rachel did it. It also proved to me not only that she had an inquiring mind, which, I mean, one assumes that history requires an inquiring mind. I think it does. But it also proved, and this was one of the reasons why I was pleased to have Rachel come to the EDOR initially, because I thought it would mean that she would be able to write a PhD thesis as well as scientific papers without instruction in basic English grammar, which she proved that she could do. So, Rachel, I thought that you were actually exceptionally well qualified to become an academic, for an academic career. And I would have to say that your lecture tonight, as well as your career so far, has proved that I was absolutely right. And I'm very proud of myself for that reason. So thank you for proving me right. I would just like to pick on a couple of things that you mentioned tonight to just talk a little bit about them. And I guess really the first thing I wanted to say is about your work in dietary sodium, which is terribly important. And that is, I think that you put the message across tonight, and I think most people here would be aware that it is generally accepted that restriction of dietary sodium is one of the most important public health measures to reduce overall cardiovascular disease risk. And as everybody has heard tonight, your work, especially your work in measurement, has made a profound contribution to the body of knowledge, but not only the body of knowledge, but to the action that has resulted and has countered that dreadful stuff that you showed us, of which you were one of the evil people who misinformed the public. But I think that we have actually now got round that, and to no small measure you have contributed. So I want to thank you and congratulate you for that. And also, I just happen to be a director of the National Heart Foundation of New Zealand, and I thank you for the contribution that you've made in New Zealand specifically, because a lot of the work in terms of guidelines of this in this area have come through the National Heart Foundation. And I thank you also for the service role that you've taken in the National Heart Foundation as a member of the Scientific Committee and other activities of the foundation. I'm very pleased you mentioned the HEHA program. And I think there are a couple of reasons why I'm pleased that you did so. First of all, it is an indication how broad your interests are in public health, and particularly in the nutritional aspects of public health. I think there is absolutely no doubt that HEHA was potentially one of the most important public health programs that has been developed in this country. But also it is a depressing reminder of the extent to which political ideology, rather than health science, drives public health agenda, not just in this country, but internationally. And it really emphasizes the importance which people like you, researchers and practitioners in public health, have to continue to get the message of the science of public health across in the hope to counter this effect of political ideology. And finally, I particularly do this on behalf of Robin, who asked me to mention this, but I would have done so anyway, I would like to acknowledge your contribution to teaching. I think the award which you received for research, for teaching in public health speaks for itself. But I think your role as a supervisor has been outstanding, and I'm sure that, I don't know how many of your research students are here, but I have the privilege of knowing and being involved in the work of many of them. They would all want me to say, as has Robin asked, to acknowledge your excellence also as a research supervisor. You have been brilliant in that regard. So really, on behalf of all of us, congratulations, thank you, best wishes. May your professorial career continue in the way in the way your career has gone up to now and the way your professorial career has started. I can't imagine what you're going to achieve in the next few years, but we wish you our very best for all that you undertake. Thank you for your lecture, and thank you for all that you've done. Give you this small token as a reminder of this event tonight and what you've done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I get the final word for the night. I'm going to thank Rachel for reminding me of my undergraduate learning, especially homogenised food and the bomb calorimeter. But also a thank you for the labelling work and the sodium guidelines, because as a practising dietitian and lecturer, that was really useful in practice and made a difference. So it is great to come back round and to see that again. So the final words tonight is to really welcome you to the Staff Club to join with Rachel and her whānau to celebrate this wonderful success and congratulate Professor Rachael McLean.